The purpose of this section of identifying where all the literature and all the resources were found is to first let the reader know where the resources were found. It's helpful if you can think about your work in the future, 2 or 5 years after your dissertation is published. Let's say somebody wants to look at your dissertation because they're thinking about doing something similar or taking your study and extending it, and they want to be able to identify all the references that you were able to get. What you're able to do in this section is let that reader know where they were all found. And not only where they were found, in what perhaps vehicle you found them, whether it be EBSCOhost or whether it be ProQuest or whether it be in the archives of a physical library. It also lets the reader know what resources were used. Which ones did you find and which ones did you use in your work? Often there's a difference. A lot of times doing literature review, you find hundreds of articles to find the 5 or 10 that you actually want to apply. That's okay, that's expected. But the idea being is let other people know where did you find them and which ones did you use. The ones you use, of course, are going to be those that are included in your dissertation itself. But what resources were used is important, because when other people want to research something similar to you, it'll help them understand where to find it. So, for example, if you were using EBSCOhost and if you were using ProQuest dissertations and you were using ProQuest otherwise for just articles, you would indicate those are the sources that you looked at. The purpose of this section is also help the reader later to understand which were primary and secondary sources that you used. Now, what you're going to be doing in your literature review, let's say, for example, you're doing a search and you found a book that you wanted to include in your work. Let's just say perhaps you were doing something in quality management and you saw that Dr. Deming is a foremost expert and his work is important to your research. That's expected, and I would expect to see that person's work in there. And he's the primary author. He's the germinal author. He's a subject matter expert of quality management improvement in certain aspects. Now, Mary Walton also has many books out on quality improvement. Matter of fact, she worked with Dr. Deming for a number of years and was his assistant. Now, if you're going to read and include work in your dissertation, you want to use Dr. Deming's work, not Mary Walton's book. Mary Walton's book is more so a popular book and is a derivative, her opinion or her insights upon what you were able to read from Dr. Deming's work. Now, I understand Dr. Deming's work is a lot more what we might say drier or to the point, where Mary Walton's work is a little easier to read. That's because one book by the master was written more at the high school, college level reading, whereas Mary Walton's book was written at the 8th grade reading level. So you can see a difference there. If you're a business management student or a leadership student, you may have had a book which is known as an anthology written by a person named Wren. Now, Wren took the collaborative works of many different authors and broke them down into small, unique chapters to put into his one book. This is a secondary source because he took all the primary authors, took their work, and gave you his opinion of them and captured all the different authors' work into his one book. This is often common in universities where they recommend an anthology, because in the anthology you can get a sense for what all the other experts wrote about in one book instead of having to maybe buy 12 other books. So thus it saves you money with the anthology, but that's a teaching mechanism. That's not the research approach that you want to do with your study. So just remember, the primary source and the secondary source are important, and that's what you're going to allude to in this section in Chapter 2 to help ground the work that you're doing to be more credible and more well received. In this section, it's also common to allude to the percentage of recent and older resources that you have found. For example, and as I promote and as I tell my mentees, when they write Chapter 2, they must have 85% recent within the last 5 years, and 15% is okay to be older than 5 years. This is because the older percentages, which is the smaller percentage of 15%, can be enough to provide some information about the historical overview and of current trends that have occurred and how they've happened. Now, 15% doesn't seem like much, but it's enough. Whereas 85% helps the reader know that when you were using the references that you applied, that it was the most current literature and information that was available at the time you did your study. So therefore, it was up to date when you did your study. If you use too many older references and you're trying to substantiate a concern that's happening today, or the literature overview of what it is today, by using older references, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't align well. But the purpose of this section is to give the reader later an understanding of basically what was the percentage of recent to older references that you included in your work. The purpose of this section also is to give some insights into the quantity of German authors. If you happen to read 10, 20, or 30 books or reviewed their information, whether you read the whole books or not, but you've cited their work, or perhaps you even use their work to ground your information but then cite it, then it's still important to know the quantity by German authors. This is later an opportunity for somebody who's going to assess your work and say, at what level of academic rigor was this? Was this just somebody who went to Barnes and Nobles and read all the popular books? Or was it somebody who went to the library and picked up the books by the masters? If you're going to do quality management related dissertation, again, as I mentioned earlier, I would expect to see some books in there from Frederick Taylor. Frederick Taylor, the father of scientific management, who wrote his first book and only book in 1911. There's other information by other authors since then, by Juran or Dr. Deming, Ishikawa. There's many experts along the way who have had their hands in the development of quality management theory as it is today. These are the German authors, the experts. Now, you may not know this if you're not in that field, and I understand that, but whether you're in healthcare and education, or whether you're in private or nonprofit organizations, you will find that there are these German authors who provided insights, whether it be on learning theory or it is how we take care of people in hospitals. This section of identifying where all the information came from and which one you're actually using is also used to identify if your study is something related to a new emerging theme. There are many people who do cutting-edge research on topics that are just emerging, and therefore there is not a lot of literature that they can use to ground their work in. If that's the case, this early section in Chapter 2 is an ideal location to help to inform the reader that the work you're going to be writing about from that point after is going to be perhaps limited, or the resources are not quite the same as you would have hoped to have had otherwise, because there just was not enough information or a lot of it to be found. And then you would go into and suggest where you looked and why you believe this is an emerging theme. That's okay. It's not common, but it's okay if you're doing that kind of research in your dissertation research to just justify it, so that when somebody starts reading later and they might think otherwise, well, gee, this person, being you, the author, didn't do a lot of work because the chapter is only 15 pages long. There may not be that much literature to support anything more than 15 pages, and that is fine when it happens. Just give that caveat early in the chapter and help the reader to gain a better understanding of what to expect. And then there would be other pertinent information. And I can't explain every option of information that you should or could put in this section, because ideally, in most cases, it's pretty cut and dry. But you may have a different situation, perhaps like the new emerging theme, that you need to include in this section. Or you may find that you have to just elaborate on one area a little bit more than all the others, because perhaps it's something that's of a major importance, and therefore you may be using one major document as the mainstay, if you will, or the main piece that you're going to allude to over and over in Chapter 2. There's nothing wrong with early in the chapter, in this section, just letting the reader know why that is and the rationale. Remember, all we're really helping the reader to do later is to understand what we did and the decisions supporting why we made those choices. So in other words, let the reader know what was going on in your mind and the rationale for that. It's not about right or wrong. It's just so that the reader can have a better understanding of your approach to your dissertation. Now, the narratives to include. I'm going to talk about this in two different ways, the narratives and then later the tables. Now, some of the same information is in the tables in a condensed sort of view, But in the narratives, in the couple of paragraphs you're going to relate to, this is the information you would find in this section. Give information about the keywords that were searched. Keywords that were searched are important because today, more than ever before, with computers and the advent of searches and search engines, we can take keywords and put them into our computer and narrow down the focus of what we're looking for very quickly. Now, I understand that some of the keywords you may put into Google, when you say narrow it down to 2 million different types of sources that are found, or in some cases you can put the same kind of keyword into a search engine in EBSCOhost or in ProQuest, and you still will narrow it down to thousands. That's okay. We want to know what were the keywords that you used. Help the reader of your work understanding what do you believe are the most important words to be searching for. And it just so happens that the words that you're searching for here would be expected to be found later in your chapter, because after all, if you're searching for quality improvement, one would think that you're going to write about quality improvement to some extent in your chapter. So again, keywords that were searched. And here you can put them in a list. You can put A, B, C, D, E. It doesn't matter how you do it. You can create a table if you care to. I will show you in a few moments in this lesson an example how some of my mentees have done that. The sources searched. In the narrative, just give information about those sources that were searched. Doesn't necessarily mean that you took content from every one of them, but let the reader know the breadth and depth of all the sources that you searched through. And you'll see examples of that also in a few minutes of how some of my mentees did it. And this is why I encourage you again, if you haven't, and even if you have, write this down again. Take your pen and paper out here right now and write this down again. On every reference, on every source that you find, write down where did you get it from. If it was a book, you might do a yellow sticky on it and then write that on there and tape it to it so it doesn't fall off. Where did you search and get that book? If it's an article, print it out. Or if you are saving it, perhaps in PDFs, then go in there and make an annotation, because you can do little bubble notes in a PDF and put in where you found it and what date you found it. That's important because that information will help you when you're writing this section. Stay informed, because believe me, after a couple thousand articles, you're not going to remember where you found every one of them. Any of the books that you consulted, put in here as well. You might want to write that you looked for books related to quality management improvement, Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, whatever types of books you're looking for, go ahead and put that here. Also indicate, were you looking at popular books? Were those books written by those secondary authors, or are they books written by the subject matter experts, the journal authors? Ideally, you don't want to use many popular books. For example, you wouldn't use somebody's book on how to complete a dissertation in your work when you're talking about the research, when you should be talking about using works from the experts such as Creswell or Yin or anybody else who are noted national subject matter experts. Those are the kinds of information that we want to see here, because again, when you tell us the types of books that you consulted and used in your work, then it helps us to assess to what extent the academic rigor is in your work. Of course, in this section, you want to talk about those journal authors' works included. If you looked at the journal authors such as Frederick Taylor, you looked at Dr. Deming, you looked at Dr. Juran, those are information insights you want to see. If you're doing something in education, how people learn, you want to talk about critical thinker, higher order skills, you want to talk about Benjamin Bloom's work, then you would want to have that in there as well. So the idea being here, again, it gives the reader an opportunity to know what journal authors, which subject matter experts you sought. For example, in my dissertation, mine had something to do with quality improvement to a slight degree, and I actually wrote Dr. Deming a letter. Dr. Deming replied back to me, and I noted that I actually had a personal conversation with him in a letter, and I had that letter in case I needed to support it. So to me, that was letting my reader know that there's some extra value. I went well beyond what I could have done or needed to do to get my dissertation done. If some of you decide that you want to call or email some subject matter expert, I encourage you to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. In many cases, some of the most popular people are willing to talk with you because they want to share their information. Because why wouldn't they? It's their work. They like to talk about their work. But if you do, then leave some information in this section about that conversation, whether it be on the phone, an email, or an actual letter. Here you would also add anything that's unique in the sense of any sources identified. Did you find a specific source somewhere that nobody else had found? And maybe it was in somebody's chest or drawer somewhere that nobody ever used before. This could be the unique thing that makes your work stick out. Now, this is an area that's subjective. I understand this, but what may be unique to you may be common to somebody else and vice versa. But there's nothing wrong with including in your narrative anything that you believe is unique that sets your work apart from somebody else's or adds more credibility to your writing. Any of the other information, if appropriate, is up to you to put into your work. I encourage you always, if you're not sure about what these unique sources are that have been identified, or if you have other information, is to contact your dissertation chair and your committee members, work with them and let them help you decide what to put in there. I've always told my mentees, if you believe it should be in there, put it in there. It's easier to take it out than it is easier to add it in later. Specifically, if you're adding information in that's relevant and it's pertinent, why would somebody want to take it out? And so therefore, it could be this is one area that you excel in where others don't take much time to put this section together. Now, I did mention about adding tables to your chapter. Many students do not do this, and I encourage you to consider adding tables and figures wherever possible, because there's an old saying that, a picture or a table is worth 1,000 words. Oftentimes, people gain better insights by looking at a table because they can glance through that quickly and get a sense of what's included. And this would be an example of providing a table to go along with the narrative that I just talked about that you'd be writing. So you might actually write 2 or 3 paragraphs of the narrative of all that information on where you found your sources, the credibility, and anything that's unique to them. And a table, you can show the numbers very quickly. And I will share some insights with you and examples from some of my mentees again in a few moments. So what to include in the tables? Of course, one of the headings might be the search topics. This may not necessarily be the keywords, but what do those keywords fall in regards to topics? Is it about education? Is it about educational leadership? Is it about the No Child Left Behind policy? Is it about nursing practices? Is it about how we care for people, how that's come to be? Is it about quality improvement? What are the large topics that you're looking at? Is it leadership? If it's transformational leadership, is it transactional leadership, or is it all of those? Another item to be in there is the peer-reviewed articles. In your table, you may want to show exactly how many peer-reviewed articles you found, because this would help the reader to gain a sense of what the percentage were or how many different articles are to be found in your work. Did you look at dissertations? Many students find that going to ProQuest dissertations online and downloading dissertations that are related to the same topic that they are studying allows them to read the chapter 2s of those dissertations and find other references that other people who have their dissertations published had used. There's nothing wrong with that. Encourage you to do that whenever possible. But if you're going to go into ProQuest dissertations and use that, then you may want to write down how many dissertations did you look at and how many did you cite from. Books. How many books did you use? Which, again, books did you have? How many more popular books? How many were newer books? How many are older books? Now, Frederick Taylor's work, if you'll note in his work, it was first published in 1911. And there's been many republications of it since. There's not been a new edition, just republications of his work, because he died soon thereafter in 1911. So there is no second edition. All there is reprints. You can use any one of those reprints that you happen to have. Whatever book you're actually taking it from is the one you would actually cite. I happen to have one that was published from 1911 because Frederick Taylor is an expert and I like reading his work. I can read that same book every year or two and find new information in it. It's not because somebody came and changed the book. It's because I've grown and I see something a little bit different than I saw before. Here, the tables just helps to produce the level of depth that you want others to know. This area, again, is subjective. Your dissertation chair may not even ask you to put any tables in there, may not care if you put them in there or not. My personal recommendation to my mentees is always put a table in there and put as much information as you can that's logical. Now I'm going to share some examples with you from 5 of my mentees and how they went about filling out this section in their work. almost all my mentees have had their work approved on the first pass, whether it be through the proposal or through the dissertation. It's because they work hard and they added value. And I believe that this section is one area with the correct information, and enough of it with a table or two will add more value than you ever thought possible. Each of my mentees who have given me their work have given me their consent to do so. They own the copyright on it. They just allowed me to use it to help you learn from their experiences. Every one of their dissertations is available in ProQuest Dissertations in case you want to download it and see their full dissertation, or in this case, perhaps the full section on how they create it, and or perhaps the whole chapter. First example I want to use is from Dr. Dustin Pollock. His dissertation was published in 2011. His dissertation is titled A Phenomenological Study, the Influence of Professional Athletes' Unethical Behavior on Amateur Athletes. This is how he talked about, or discussed, if you will, wrote in his dissertation. Title search was the name of the section. The details and information offered in this literature review originated primarily from peer-reviewed journal articles, professional journal articles, and dissertations. A principal source of reference was EBSCOhost and ProQuest electronic databases, as well as through other university library resources. So here he gave an indication which were predominantly used and where principally the references came from. This helps the reader to understand a little bit about the breadth and depth of his work and where he found his literature. Then he went on to write, other commonly used references include articles acquired within the Questia online library, books, internet newspaper articles, and subject searches, as well as congressional reports, newsletters, organizational reports, and guidelines from the National Collegiate Athletic Association. You're able here to get a sense of the breadth of areas that he looked to find information. And some of you may say, well, wait a minute, how come he could use internet newspaper articles? There's nothing wrong with using certain types of non-academic literature as long as it's appropriate. And it would be the smaller amounts. You wouldn't use this extensively, unless, of course, you're doing something that's new and it's a topic that's emerging. But there are still some insights and information in sources that you can use. Just use them sparingly and only when appropriate. In this slide, there's a lot of words here, but I just wanted you to see literally how somebody went about talking about the title searches as far as the keyword searches and phrases that were looked at. So you can see how many different items were here, and ended with the report to the Commissioner of Baseball on independent investigation into illegal use of steroids and other performance-enhancing substances by players in a Major League Baseball, referred to hereafter as the Mitchell Report. Here you're able to gain a sense of what he was searching for through EBSCOhost and ProQuest and dissertations to find as much information as he could. He added this table in Chapter 2, Overview of Major Literature Title Searches. Here you see on the left-hand column the topic of examination on ethics, performance-enhancing substances, sportsmanship, steroids, and research methodology. Now you can also see the numbers on where he found each of those, whether it be in the peer-reviewed articles, in dissertations, or books that he looked at. Now you wonder perhaps why he has research methodology. Because he had to do a literature review on his research method and design to help him better understand how to do this dissertation. So I had him include all that information in here because it's important that you also understand that while he is a subject matter expert in his topic, he also was becoming a greater consumer of research by his research methodology. By him reading 10 dissertations and reading 8 books, he became a better researcher and understood his research method and design better. There's nothing wrong with that. That can be included, and I encourage you to do the same. The second example is from Dr. Joseph Hagee. His dissertation was published in 2013. His title of his dissertation is Influence of Religion and Religiosity on Leadership Practices in the Workplace, a Quantitative Correlation Study. Now I want to prepare you for the next slide. It's quite intense and you may not be able to see it very well. Joe Hagee also won the Dissertation of the Year award because he provided a value-added dissertation in every aspect. In this slide here, you can see his table 2, the summary of literature found by search topic and search tool, provides literally information from thousands of different topics and areas that he looked at. So if you look across the top from left to right, you'll see the different resources that he used. And if you look even under Google Scholar, you'll see in some cases there were 63,000 items there. And you combine that with the others he looked at, he had 64,000 items that he perhaps looked through to help define the literature that he wanted to use in his study. Doesn't necessarily mean he used them all, but it means that how many items were there. You can see literally where he went and found information. This is the power of putting the table together here, is that a reader can very quickly read this and gain a sense for exactly what the search topics were and the different areas where this author went to look to find the information. Now, Dr. Maria Puente, in her dissertation published in 2012, titled Selling: The Lived Experiences of Domestic Property and Casualty Insurance Leaders, provides this information in her dissertation. Critical phrases and terms allowed one to assemble as many relevant sources as possible. The essential terms and phrases used for this study were the following, and you see there she's got about 12 different items that she provides here for the reader in case the reader wants to go do his or her own searches. There's no reason to have to try and figure it out from Chapter 2. Dr. Maria Puente is very open and says, these are the things that I was looking at. She went on to write, the literature search consists of using sources primarily from 2007 to 2012, with the exception of sources used to gain historical perspective. What she's indicating here is that within that time frame, that 5 years, is where her research was from, with the exception of the older sources, which are the historical perspective. She very openly lets the reader know basically where the resources are from. References to more than 1,000 journal articles on topics ranging from selling, organizational culture, to leadership, contributor framework, and then she provides information in a table as well. But here she's telling the reader more than 1,000 journal articles. That's a lot of journal articles to find perhaps maybe the 57 or so that's in her dissertation. Here you'll find a new table that you haven't seen yet, but it's one I discussed. Dr. Maria Puente went one step more and added even more value by creating this table and gave an indication of which ones were less than 5 years old and which were older than 5 years old. So you can see that 91% of her work were articles within the last 5 years of her dissertation from when it was published, and 9% of them were older. So you can see the balance. Earlier I talked about 85-15. 85 and 15% is a balance. 85% current, 15 older. She exceeded that average. So if nothing else, you can gain a sense by looking at this table the value of her references that she included. Now, in example number 4 by Patricia Schroeder, published in 2013, her dissertation titled A Quantitative Correlation Study of Individualism, Collectivism, and Employee Innovation in Turkey, provide this information. Resources used in the literature review included books, journals, articles, and reports gathered through research in the university library. Economic data were sourced from reports available throughout the web search. And she went on to continue with title searches were conducted using the keywords collectivism, creativity, Hofstede's value dimensions, and a few others, so you can see the breadth or scope of the words that she went searching for. Again, there's no one correct way on how to put the information in here. She didn't use a table, but that's okay. You don't have to. It just can add value to your work. She then continued on. The literature review process included the use of multiple databases, including EBSCOhost, Emerald, ProQuest, and Sage. The literature review included 13 books, 59 peer-reviewed articles, 2 survey manuals, and 2 statistical reports sourced from the web. The total of 76 references include 2 journal works and 65 or 86 sources that were published since 2008. So here we see she's not only given us the information on how many she picked up from what location, but helps us to understand that 86% were within the last 5 years. Again, you can see the value just in this paragraph of the level of her work that you would find and expect in the rest of the chapter. And that's exactly what you want to do. Help the reader through this section understand the breadth and depth and scope of the work to follow in Chapter 2. Now, the final example I'll share with you from Dr. Susan Krysteniak. Her work was published in 2011, and her dissertation is titled Exploring the Experiences of Complementary Therapy Nurses, a Qualitative Phenomenological Study. She suggested in her work the relative breakdown of literature sources include 18 books, 43 empirical research articles, 32 peer-reviewed search articles, 8 popular articles, 12 journal works, and 24 from professional organization websites and 4 other sources. She could have put this together in a table or added a table to include it if she wanted to, but you can get a sense from this sentence basically where her information came from. And then she wrote approximately 85% of the references were published within the past 5 years, or 120 of the 141 number of references and personal dialogues with B. Newman and Quinn were included. So you see, not only does she give you the percentage here, she went on to talk about who else she had these personal conversations with. So if you're having a personal conversation work included in chapter 2, nothing wrong with alluding to it early on that that's what's going to happen. Now you'll find out later that these personal dialogues were with subject matter experts, and therefore they were allowed and more than anything else relevant to her work. Go of the work that you've done when you publish your dissertation.